Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You're listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks here on 12radio.com and also simulcasting on my YouTube channel, which has the same name, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. And hopefully we are listening to something, saying something today that will change the way that we collectively listen to the world. This is December 16th, 2025. And on today's show, we're going to look at the week ahead, but we're actually going to go several weeks ahead. We're going to look at that new moon in Sagittarius, which is happening this Friday, the 19th of December. We're going to touch base with the new moon, but then we're going to do a deep dive into the sign of Capricorn, because of course we are moving into the season of Capricorn, the winter solstice, when we have the very shortest night in the northern hemisphere and the very longest day down under. That's when the sun enters Capricorn each year. And this year that's going to be on Sunday, December 21st. It's going to be about 7:03, I think, in the morning. That's Pacific time. So that's the official opening of Capricorn. But of course, Mars moved into Capricorn, that planet of action and movement and initiation, that moved into Capricorn last Sunday. And so we've already got the introduction. It's already been there. And of course, looking forward, this is one of the reasons I want to look forward, because of course we're going into the holidays. Well, Venus is going to move into Capricorn on December 24th. So on Christmas Eve, we're going to have Venus there. Then Mercury is going to kind of round everything out by entering Capricorn on January 1st. So as we go into these final weeks of December, we've got a lot of Capricorn energy. And it's one of the signs, I love all the signs. I think you can tell that just by listening to me. I always find things that I really like about all of them. But Capricorn has always been kind of close to my heart. When I first started studying astrology, and I mean first, like the first week I ever opened an astrology book and was reading about the signs, I was particularly taken by Capricorn. And it was interesting because the book showed me how to do some quick calculations. I had to go buy, of course, the right reference books, but it was literally an instructional guide about how to calculate charts. So I kind of quickly did the math. I didn't have everything I needed, so I quickly did the math. And I thought I was a Capricorn rising, and I was thrilled. Well, then when I got all the reference books and redid all the calculations, I realized that actually I was a Sag rising, and I'll be honest, I was upset. And I was upset because I loved that structure of Capricorn. And I think at that time I was, I was in graduate school. I also had a job. I had a lot of responsibility. So I think that Capricorn idea just really, really appealed to me. And so then I'm reading Sagittarius, and it's carefree, and it's not making commitments, and it's all over the place. And I think, I don't need that. I need structure in my life. So honestly, there was a period of time, I'd even say 6 months, that I was really disappointed that I was not a Capricorn rising. And I don't have other planets in Capricorn either. I do have Chiron, but I do like Capricorn a lot. I love the structure of it. I like Saturn as the planet that rules it. So you'll probably hear that in my voice, that I have a certain appreciation for Capricorn. It's special. It's special to me, even if I am a Sag rising. And by the way, I am now thrilled. After all these years, I am thrilled to have a Sag rising. And I know that it fits me so much better than Capricorn would have. And which kind of brings me to that we all have all these signs somewhere in our charts. Even if you don't have a planet in a sign, you still have that sign. It was in the sky at the time that you were born. So it certainly influences a part of your life. As you look at that astrology chart, you'll see where Capricorn, that particular constellation, sits. So moving on, can't get stuck right here in the beginning of the show. That brings me to my schedule. There will be no show on Tuesday, December 23rd, a couple days before Christmas. And, oftentimes we have not had radio the last couple weeks of December, but I am planning at this point to come back on Tuesday, December 30th, because as I was looking at the year ahead, I thought, well, we just can't go into the first without doing a show. I mean, that just doesn't seem right. So unless my schedule gets really, really hectic, I do plan to return on Tuesday, December 30th, but next week there won't be a show. But the other thing I want you to be assured of, because a lot of people, they'll start asking, is usually in the past, the radio hosts and the psychics at 12listen.com, we've always put together a prediction show. So this year, Serena, one of the psychics and radio hosts from 12listen.com, she is, and by the way, she is our radio producer. Thank you, Serena, for that. She is putting together the prediction show. So I don't know all of the details at this point in the timing and that sort of thing, but it will be on January 9th. That's a Friday, and it is an evolving project, so we'll get you more information as we go through. And but I plan to be involved, so I think that'll be something really fun too. Now, meanwhile, also about schedules, I will be available for personal sessions on 12listen.com through the holidays. So please feel free to request a schedule, call on a day and time that's good for you if you want to connect. I mean, I will be online some days, but with the holidays, you don't know quite what's going on. So if you say, hey, I really want to look at my chart, or I just really would like, a quick, check-in or something, please let me know and I will try to make myself available. And of course, Mark's Power Peak. We will be powering through the holidays. That's always going to be there for you. And that is a free newsletter, or I don't know what, I always call it a newsletter. That seems like a really old-fashioned word. But in any case, that is those are a series of articles. They're free. They come to your email box every Saturday nights, and you can subscribe for free. So please do that. You can find the link over at 12listen.com. And then you'll see, the articles that I'm writing through the holidays, letting you know what's going on. Where's the moon? What are the planets that are moving? And what is the energy going through the holidays? You can always check that out in Mark's Power Peak. So do that if that's something that appeals to you. All right, so let's get started. I first want to kind of just say, hey, thanks for coming over to the chat room on YouTube. Leslie, I think you were the first person there. Thank you very much. And Renee and Quelly. And I probably should refresh. Hey, James, it's good to see you too. Yeah, and he's saying Chiron in Capricorn, 6 degrees, 8th house. All right, James, thank you for that. We're not going to specifically talk about Chiron, but we're going to talk a lot about Capricorn today. So everybody, you're welcome to come over there and post. And I do try to check into that every once in a while. So thank you for joining me that way. That's always nice. All right, so let's do that quick check-in. Maybe not so quick, but just touch base with the new moon in Sagittarius. It's going to be at 28 degrees, almost the very, very end of Sagittarius. That's going to be on Friday, December 19th. Now, Sagittarius, according to Raven Caldera, he talks about all the signs often in terms of a dance, which has always appealed to me because I've always thought of it as the cosmic dance. Well, he talks about Sagittarius as being a dance toward and away from truth. And I like that because, we're always moving towards, what is life about? What's it all about, Elfie? And, searching for truth. But there again, truth is such a big word, or it's a loaded word. But, a lot of times I think we can break it down into not so much truth, just universally, but what is true for us? What really is the way we want to live our lives? What are those principles we want to live our lives by? You might want to break it down and think about it that way, or you could think about it more universally if you want to. But that's what Sagittarius is about. It's about having all those experiences, collating the information together, and distilling it for yourself into a personal philosophy. So as we go into this new moon, a couple of things, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but This is a moon that has a lot of moving parts, I think, this new moon cycle, because Venus is sitting at 24 Sagittarius. So it's sitting right there with the sun and the moon. Now, I think that's sweet because that too, because Venus is the planet of values, it makes me think that this particular cycle, that's what we're looking for. Maybe it's a little more personal because we're looking for what are our personal values, what rings true for us. So some of those searching, that seeking out the truth or having those experiences, maybe overall that's what we're looking for. Maybe we do some things that we've always done before. There's traditions and there's just cycles or things that we do and we go, oh, I always do this, especially through the holidays, and maybe we find that's just not ringing true for me anymore. Or maybe we find those things, we go, you know what, I really miss this. If I don't make the chocolate chip cookies, it just doesn't feel like the holidays to me, or whatever. You get my drift. That Venus says we are digging a little bit deeper into our values and what's important, So Mars is also sitting very close to the sun and the moon, although it's sitting in Capricorn. It's sitting at 3 degrees of Capricorn. Now, when I see that, it's almost like I feel it's calling, come on, guys, join me in Capricorn. But it also introduces the idea that in addition to the Sagittarian freedom and the need to seek and the need to be spontaneous, there's also the Capricorn that says, but you know what? If you don't structure anything, if you don't organize it, if you don't plan it, then maybe it'll all dissipate. So I think Mars is introducing a little bit of that structure and motivation that we see in Capricorn that's also influencing the sun and the moon. Then also what's kind of interesting is the sun, moon, and Venus are also square. That means there's a conflict with Saturn at 25 Pisces. Because remember, Neptune and Saturn, they're sitting at the end of Pisces. So all of that Sag energy at the very end is conflicting with it. So the sun, moon, Venus, and even Mars are all square Neptune. So we've got that kind of combination going on as well. But there again, maybe how that manifests for us is just what we were talking about a minute ago, which is it's fine to have all of that energy and it's fine to have all the optimism and hope. But sometimes if you don't make a plan, if you can't figure a way to ground the energy, and in this case with Pisces, if you can't tie it maybe to your imagination, to your dreams, to your spiritual connection, then it simply kind of just dissipates. So all those planets, even though there is conflictual energy, in fact, even the sun and the moon, it's in conjunct Uranus and Taurus as well. Well, I look at that and I go, well, you know what? This is complicated. It's multi-layered. But it's also the reminder that we're not just unilateral people with one desire, one purpose. We have lots of different moving parts ourselves. There are things that we are trying to collate, things that we're trying to put together. And we honor all of those. Like, for instance, if you've got multiple children, maybe even just 2 kids, they may not always have the same things that they want. Or maybe you've got brothers and sisters, or maybe you have a lot of extended family. Does everybody want exactly the same thing? Well, of course not. But can you seek to, have a happy, holiday dinner or an activity that a lot of people are going to be pleased with? So it's not always just about compromise, but it is about listening to all those voices and then kind of weighing those voices, listening to what they're saying, giving them consideration. In this case, Neptune, Saturn, Mars, all these, and even Uranus, giving them all a say, but understanding how to and when I say understanding, it's kind of a struggle sometimes, right? It can be a struggle. But during this new moon cycle, we may come to a much better understanding of, here again, what our personal values are and what we think is the most important, which is kind of what we're always moving towards, right? We want more clarity. So with this particular new moon, I think one of the things we need to do, which probably is always true, is we need to use both logic and intuition. Lean heavily into whichever one feels right, but make sure that there's a balance. And it's okay to struggle with different ideas and beliefs. It's okay to find out that something you believe isn't true, or that that's not what you think anymore. That's okay to change your mind. And Sag is very much about bringing all these disparate beliefs and ideas together, and to come into contact with as many different things and people as possible to gain experience, and then to analyze it, collate it, bring it together, and figure out what sticks and what doesn't. I know Mark on his show yesterday was talking about confirmation bias. And by the way, I hope you listen to Mark Husson, astrologer, great information, always entertaining. But he was talking about confirmation bias. And that's that idea that we tend to listen to what we already believe. We see what we already know or understand or expect to see. But in this case with this moon, I think we're going to see some things, if we're open to it, that could cause a little struggle, could cause us to go, whoa, is that still true? Is that not true at all? And we've got to just kind of go into it with this idea of unflinching analysis. Clear away the irrelevancies or the simplifications that are really blinding us to what's going on in our own lives or to something that we really want to see. And then using that hard-earned, experience to really come up with something that's meaningful to us. Because remember, Sag is the student, the teacher, the wounded healer, and the storyteller and the philosopher. Well, how do you get to that? You get to that by going through those sort of psychological, emotional struggles to figure out what's important to you and what's not. Now, another thing, as we go through this 29.5-day lunar cycle, like I said, it's kind of interesting because there's this juxtaposition with all this structure and planning and down-to-earth energy that's coming in with Capricorn. But what we're also going to see because of that Sagittarius cycle is it's a need for freedom. I mean, people, if you're hearing people say, hey, don't fence me in, don't make me make a decision, then they're kind of leaning into Sagittarius. There might be a tendency to want to escape from an uncomfortable situation. You might hear people say something like, I just want to keep my options open. I don't know how I'm going to feel next week or next month or next year. I mean, you even heard me say, I'm not sure about the 30th. My plan is to do a show. But I don't know exactly how I'm going to feel. That's kind of the Sagittarian energy going, can I keep my options open? So if you find people are resistant to making promises or to planning for the future, you're hearing Sagittarius. You're hearing that just uncertainty saying, hey, I want more information. And I just want to be able to be spontaneous. So keep that in mind. Another thing that we don't talk about a lot, but Sagittarius, maybe more than any other sign, wants to be right. So if you find yourself getting into an argument or discussion with somebody and they just don't seem to want to let go of something, that's kind of Sagittarius too. Because Sag does put a lot of energy into getting information. So once they formulate a philosophy, it's like it may be hard to budge them out of that. All right? But remember that this Sag lunar cycle is running in tandem and in juxtaposition with all that Capricorn energy. So what you've got is Jupiter, the planet that rules Sagittarius, remember, it's expansion. Bigger is better. But it's being contained, or it's running right next door to Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, which is the planet of limitations and bringing things into focus. Being the container that can hold all of that enthusiasm. So I'm going to just give a couple more things about Sag, and then we're going to move on to Capricorn. And what I wanted to do is just highlight a few people with Sagittarian moons, because they kind of say it all. And one of the people I always think of with Sag moon is Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of Queen, because he said a couple of things. He said, it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. I feel good. And no one's going to stop me now. He also said, the bigger the better in everything. Now see, that's Sag talking. Judy Garland also had a Sag moon. And one thing I find interesting about some of her quotes, along with Freddie Mercury, which is something we could think about, is that they both had multiple quotes about being idols and legends because of their occupations, and yet being incredibly lonely. So, there is that side to it. And I'm not saying Sag is lonely, but I'm saying when we're always seeking, when we're always on the move, when we're always spontaneous, and if we don't balance it out, there is this sense of always kind of ending up alone. Now, one more person, Christopher Reeve, had Moon and Mars in Sagittarius. And I love this because this was after he was injured. He said, I'm not living the life I thought I would lead, but it does have meaning. It has purpose. There's love, there's joy, there's laughter. And see, once again, finding meaning in your life is very Sagittarian. And Albert Einstein, he said, an old man's advice to youth, never lose a holy curiosity. Very, very Sag. Okay, let's jump into Capricorn, because I promised that's where we were really going to go today. So we're not completely saying goodbye to Sag, but we will be soon, right? All right, so with the winter solstice, that's Sunday morning, 7 Pacific time, that's when we officially enter the season of winter, and astrologically speaking, the season of Capricorn. And I mentioned we've got all those planets who are going to collectively be in Capricorn. Mars is there, the sun is moving on Sunday, Venus will be there next week, and Mercury on January 1st. And by the way, I love that Mercury because it will be in Sag until then. So we'll have plenty of opportunity to make those New Year's resolutions and to think about what we want and to put all that information together. However, by January 1st, we're off and running. We're ready to make some agreements and some commitments. And by the way, for any of you who care, when Mercury goes retrograde, which it did not too long ago, there's always a period of collating or kind of assembling all the lessons we've learned. Today, Mercury actually hits the point that it started that retrograde. So that means this is not the last day that we can ever kind of learn our lessons. But if something comes up today and you go, yeah, this is one more gift from the Mercury retrograde, just keep that in mind. Okay. All right, as a basis, this is really basic, but just to remind you that every zodiac sign is unique. It's associated with one element and one modality. There are no duplicates. We sometimes talk about, I'll talk about all the earth signs, Virgo and Taurus and Capricorn, and they may in your mind, you go, oh, well, those all sound kind of the same. They share that quality of the element. But every single sign, there is no duplicate because it's one element and it's one modality. And that's what separates them. That's what makes 12 unique signs. Every sign is also associated with one planet that we call the ruler. And you'll always notice that that planet has a lot of the same characteristics and qualities of the sign. But one is more like action. It's kind of like the verb, if you think about, language. It's also, every sign is associated with one house of the zodiac. So there again, those things are not exactly interchangeable, but that's one of the things that makes astrology easy to learn and so cohesive. Because once you know about the planet, and then you can associate how that manifests in a sign, and then you understand how the house, or that area of your life, is associated with that, it all starts coming together. So with Capricorn, it's cardinal. That's its modality. It's cardinal earth. Those cardinal signs are always the ones that open the season. They're movers and shakers. They initiate action. They're at the beginning of something. Earth signs are having to do with the physical material form. So Capricorn is a mover and shaker, but maybe slower than Aries, which is fire, because it has to do with the earth. These are the doers of the zodiac, those earth signs. Dependable, realistic, and structured. But you know what? They're often sensual. Now, that's a quality I think with Capricorn we don't think about all the time, but it has to do with the body. So it's a very sexual, a very sensual, a very body conscious sort of sign. Now, another thing we don't often talk about are polarities. And polarities in astrology, you can easily say, like, it's sort of associated with yin yang. Like, they're either external and logical, outgoing and left brain, or they have the tendency to be more internal and receptive and intuitive, maybe introverted or right brained. Now, to me, it seems kind of odd, but Capricorn is one of the yin signs, which is why oftentimes maybe we see them as being a little more introverted, maybe a little less, just out there, like I had done the comparison with Aries. Aries out there, it's fire, and it's hot and it's warm and it's moving fast. Capricorn is slow. It's thinking things through. So it's an earth sign, it's yin, and it's also that cardinal at the same time. So when we look at Capricorn, here's some things, that I think they're, what would you call them? They're just hooks that you can always remember. Well, people used to talk about these. I don't hear so much, but it just qualities. Capricorn was always, I use. And I think that's helpful because that's it. Capricorn looks around and says, how can I use this? What can this be used for? I see my physical universe and I find a purpose. I find a use for everything. And by the way, purpose is a very, very important word to Saturn, the ruler, and to Capricorn in general. In fact, you ever get confused, come right back to that idea. What is the purpose? That's always going to be the focus of Capricorn. Capricorn is the path of commitment, responsibility, resourcefulness, and integrity. When we think about Capricorn, we think about archetypes. Remember, it's the mountain goat. Sometimes it's called the sea goat, but the mountain goat. Have you ever seen a mountain goat? You know how they hang off the edge? I often mention I spent a lot of time in Colorado. That's where I lived most of my life. And I'll tell you what, when you see those goats up there on those mountain ledges, it's unbelievable. It looks like they are just literally hanging by a thread off the side of these mountain cliffs. It's pretty amazing to see. So that's who Capricorn is. We often associate it with the father, with the builder, with the executive, with the manager. Anytime you're thinking about something in business, it's just pretty much synonymous with Capricorn, the CEO, the leader. Now, doesn't mean that they have to be, but these are the people that plan, they organize, they strategize. They want to organize the physical element, the physical earth. They're also associated with the devil in the tarot. Now, there again, I don't know how much we're going to get into that today. And that can sometimes people go, what? But here again, the devil is also associated with the mythological character of Pan. And I think it's very Capricorn because Pan, once again, was part goat, right? But it was also that, kind of sensuous, sexual, addictive kind of, follow me, follow me. So there's leadership there, as well as the sensuality. But the other thing about the devil card is once we get really into that kind of energy, that is about structuring your life, but being careful not to get into the addiction, to not let something that's a really positive habit get so routine, get so embedded in your life that you can't move outside of it, that you're in a little box. So there again, maybe we'll talk about the devil card another time, but that is the tarot archetype for Capricorn. And it's very positive in many of its forms because it is that ability to form habits. It's that ability to structure something, to lead something. It's also associated with the 10th house. If you think about the 10th house in a chart, what do we call that? We call it work. We call it profession. We call it career. It has to do with reputation. Sometimes an old-fashioned way of talking about it, you'll see it in books or you'll hear people say, it's crystallized consciousness. If you think about the rising sign in somebody's chart, that's how we present our personalities. Here I am. This is who I want you to think of me as. But the 10th house is kind of a deeper, bigger version of that. What is my legacy? What is my reputation? What is my productivity here on this planet? And as I said before, it's ruled by Saturn, the planet of limitation and restriction, the planet of ultimate organization is Saturn. And Saturn, to me, if it says anything, it's always going to be, what is your purpose? Which to me is not a negative thing at all. In fact, it is so incredibly positive, because that's what keeps us in line. It keeps us on track. What's your purpose? What's your goal here? What are you trying to accomplish? So with Capricorn, they're always searching for the inner manager. Now think about it. Sag is always searching for greater meaning. Well, Capricorn is searching for their own inner manager, the leader, the one who can organize and plan things. So the mythology of Capricorn, it's always interesting to go back to that. And I always start this one with a line that Mark Husson said, which is, Capricorn's always about angry fathers and vengeful mothers. Makes me laugh. I mean, truly, that's not a very funny statement, but it always makes me laugh. Because it's just so succinct, maybe. But if you remember some of the mythology that's associated with Capricorn, it's about Kronos and Rhea, Rhea was the sun, and or at least I think so. Sometimes I get this wrong. But anyway, the point is, Kronos is a father. He ends up banishing all of his children, and here again, don't worry about the name. Sometimes I get it wrong, but let's just go with this. The father, decides that he is going to banish all of his children. In fact, I think he eats some of them, because he's convinced that there is a prophecy that says your children are going to rise up against you. So this father says, I'm going to just get rid of all these kids. So Cronus, he eats them, or he gets rid of all of them. But one of his children that is born is Zeus. And Zeus is hidden away and protected. Now, that's where Rhea comes in. I think he's the uncle. But in any case, like I said, I'm sorry, it's Mo that's really great with mythology, and Mark too. But in any case, so one of these children is born, and he's hidden away by his uncle, so that the father won't kill him. But here again, this is almost always about father and mother issues, because mother wasn't protecting the children, and father was kind of out to get them because he was afraid they were going to rise up against him. So when we look at the mythology that's associated with Capricorn, and here again, if you are a sun sign Capricorn, or you've got a lot of strong Capricorn in your chart, you may really resonate to this mythology, and it may explain some things. Like, even if you had the most loving parents in the world, it doesn't mean that somehow you related to them that way. Maybe you still felt ostracized. Maybe you still felt like, yeah, they sent me away to boarding school, or they did this, that, and the other thing. And, you may have somehow, built up some sense of being that ostracized child. But we all have Capricorn in our chart. So for all of us, we may resonate to this mythology in some way, that we were denied parental guidance. Somehow we didn't have this loving, wonderful, warm, touchy-feeling kind of childhood. Somewhere along the line, we have a sense of having a parent or an authority in our life that's stern or controlling. Maybe they're missing. Maybe that was it. Maybe they weren't there at all. And some kind of being deprived, right? And here again, remember, this is mythology. So it may or may not be true. And another thing I've mentioned before that I think is very interesting, and boy, I can speak to this because I have 9 brothers and sisters. And if you would talk to all those people, you would think they had different parents, and we don't. We've got the same 2 parents. But I'll tell you what, my mom is not my brother's mom. I mean, the way he talks, and I often, every once in a while, I literally go, well, your mom may have done that, but my mom didn't, because we all have different experiences of our parents. When we look at somebody's chart and we look at Saturn, that's often an indication of what kind of experience we had with father or with authority. The moon is often our experience with mother. But once again, in my family, there's 10 children, all with the same parents. But you look at those Saturns and moons, and you're going to find a very different story. So don't get stuck on any of this in terms of, oh my gosh, this is right. I didn't have the right kind of parents, or this happened and that happened. Try not to do that. But on the other hand, if you understand it, if you understand that, oh my gosh, when I look at that Capricorn house in my chart, I really can feel where I feel like that abandoned child, where I feel like I didn't get the support or the nurturing or something that I needed in my life, right? And this is how it can work for you, though. The wonderful thing about Capricorn is out of that mythology of, because of course, what happens? Zeus rises up and kind of destroys his father. But the wonderful thing I think about Capricorn is it's the story of the child who finally gets up and says, you know what? I'm not going to wait around for somebody to do something for me, to give me a handout, to give me an inheritance, to make everything okay for me. I'm going to do it on my own. And so when you sense that in a person, that sense of, I'm going to do this on my own, that is very, very Capricorn. Because they are that goat hanging onto the edge. And they go, you know what? I need to build my own self-confidence, my own self-esteem. I need to have this sense within me that I can do it. And sometimes you'll even see that with a person who says, no, for this particular project, I don't want to work with a team. I don't want to work with anybody else. I want to prove to myself I can do this. And in fact, I think sometimes when you hear a small child go, no, let me do it. Let me do it myself. It's even more than a sense of independence. It's like, I need to know that I can do it. So yeah, thanks for, putting on my little shorts, or thanks for putting on my shoes and tying them for me. But I need to know that I can do it myself. And to me, that is Capricorn speaking through us. So the characteristics of Capricorn are motivation. They tend to be responsible. It's about assuming adult responsibilities. And they're experienced and dedicated, authoritative. That's where we get our authority and our power, when we understand our own strengths. They're ambitious, they're self-disciplined, hardworking, patient, honest, resourceful, determined, dependable, efficiency. That is Virgo, but it's also very much Capricorn. Pragmatic and practical and systematic. Being able to look at the big picture, being able to make a plan, being able to be that vessel that contains energy or emotion. They're competent, they're persevering, maybe more than almost anything. Now, the typical Capricorn energy is also conservative. Now, when I say conservative, though, think about the base of that word, to conserve something. So protective of the past, to conserve an energy. So yes, we end up using that word in political terms, and we use it in lots of places in our life. We're conservative, but it just means, the Capricorn person is going, show me the stuff, prove to me it works. I'm not the one who's totally spontaneous and is going to jump on every new idea. I need to know that it's going to work. So yes, they tend to be conservative or traditional. They tend to be a little cautious. Now, this is also the sign that I would say, if ever there was a model for Scrooge, in the Christmas Carol, it's Capricorn. Because they say, you know what, I'm going to hold on to things. I'm going to be controlling, and maybe I'm going to get a little bit rigid. Maybe I'm going to become that devil, and there can be pessimism there. I mean, think about it. If you feel like it's me against the world, maybe there's a natural tendency to move in that direction. So yes, if you got a lot of Capricorn energy in your chart, or if you just relate to it, maybe one of the things you have to really work on is negativity, or being pessimistic, always thinking something's not going to work, or thinking you're the only person that can fix it, or that you've got to take care of it. That is certainly one of the lessons of Capricorn, is letting other people in, being the team player. But once again, I think once Capricorn understands their own worth, then they're not as anxious and eager to be out there proving it to everybody. They're more relaxed. In fact, we say that Capricorn ages backwards. And I think that's really true too. It's almost like they're born very mature. As children, they're very mature. But then they get more spontaneous. They develop a sense of humor. They laugh more as they get older. That's it. By the time, they get to be old age, they don't look like Capricorn anymore. They have somehow proven all those things to themselves. And yeah, they can be workaholics, no doubt. That's kind of the Capricorn thing. They're the workaholics of the zodiac. They take career and job more seriously than most people. But once again, think about it. It's about public image, status, reputation is important. But this is one distinction that I sort of wanted to give as an example. When I think about Taurus, Taurus is ruled by Venus. It's an earth sign. And Taurus loves to have money, loves to have stuff, loves to be comfortable. Here I am living in this castle. Here I'm living in this home, and I've got everything I could possibly want to consume. Because remember, the mythology of Taurus is King Midas, right? Who kept that bowl that Neptune had given to him. He didn't want to give it back. He wants lots of stuff. And here again, I'm giving a very limited view of Taurus. But see, Taurus likes to have those resources and that money because they want to be comfortable. But Capricorn, to me, is also the person, oftentimes you're going to see them. They're going to be the millionaire, the billionaire. They're going to be the person with all the money and all the resources. But I think Capricorn wants it for a different reason. Capricorn wants that money, wants to buy things to impress people, to create a public image of that they've made it. Because remember, this is that child trying to prove that they're as good as everybody else, or trying to prove that they can do it. So I think the way a Capricorn uses money has a lot more to do with their public image and their status and their reputation than Taurus, who says, I just want it because I want to enjoy it. And there again, I'm giving a very limited view of both of these, but that's one way where you can see there's a different distinction. Or even with Virgo being another earth sign. Why, what's motivating? Well, Virgo is more motivated by wanting to do things perfectly. And being able to create something, they find joy in being able to totally control the physical universe. You'll find them being master craftsmen, just making something incredible. But Capricorn, there's almost always this underlying need to, like I said, impress people. And don't see that as negative. They want to impress upon their own consciousness and to other people as well. Hey, I can do this. It doesn't matter if I was an abandoned child. None of these things matter because I have raised myself up. I've been able to show you that I can do this. So that's how Capricorn will often use money for reputation and status. It's just a little bit different. It's that 10th house stuff. So moving on, I wanted to mention the death card, as tarot, because no, this is not Capricorn, but I often think of that kind of energy because winter traditionally, and here again, if you're talking about the northern hemisphere, you're talking about the snow, the cold, the quiet. You're talking about dormancy, when all the plants, they're soaking up all their energy and they're holding it in their roots. This is a time that the earth and the crops seem to be just going through that death cycle, because what they're really doing is they're going through a reset, because then they're going to come back in the spring. So this is a time when we're literally transitioning or recreating ourselves, and we're persevering through tough times because we're building the strength to reemerge in the spring. So here again, I just kind of thought I'd throw that out, not because it is a death card, but just that idea that it's a rebirth. It's a transition cycle. Winter is that quiet evolution that involves that dormancy period. So maybe we even feel that with ourselves. We kind of pull in, even if we're not living in a cold place, we may tend to do that. All right, so now I want to highlight some of these traits by talking about people with Sun in Capricorn. Now, here's a person I don't quote very often, Richard Nixon, the president that resigned. I think the only president in U.S. history that resigned. I may or may not be right about that. But in any case, he had Sun, Mercury, Jupiter in Capricorn. Now, it's also interesting, if you know some astrology, his sun was opposite Neptune. Neptune, which I think is kind of perfect for him, because almost like a sun that was, I almost want to say, out of control, because he didn't have the balance of Neptune, or maybe delusional about what he could really do or get away with. So his sun was opposite Neptune. Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter were opposite Pluto. So, boy, I mean, when I was looking at this the other day, I thought, wow, that would be an interesting class, or just an interesting study in general. I'm sure lots of people have done it with his chart. There's lots to be learned there, but we're going to leave it for today because that's not our topic. But here's a couple quotes from him. The greatness comes not when things always go good for you, but the greatness comes when you're really tested, when you take some knocks, some disappointments, when sadness comes. Because only if you have been in the deepest valley can you ever know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain. And I'll tell you what, I don't remember everything else about his chart, but that is Capricorn. Just that idea. And notice how he almost relishes that idea of some knocks and disappointments and sadness. Being down is the only way you're going to know what it feels like to be up. He also said, defeat doesn't finish a man, quitting does. A man is not finished when he's defeated. He's finished when he quits. Capricorn all over. He said, I can take it. The tougher it gets, the cooler I get. Boy, I love these quotes. Maybe I should have been using some of them before. He also said, so are you lean and mean and resourceful, and you continue to walk on the edge of the precipice because over the years you have become fascinated by how close you can walk without losing your balance. Now, does that sound like the mountain goat or what? I mean, when I read that, I thought, wow, it is just incredibly perfect for the mountain goat, walking on the precipice. Now, here's another interesting one, a person I also don't quote very often. Humphrey Bogart had Sun, Venus, and Mars in Capricorn. Now, here's another thing. I don't remember where his Mercury was, but the truth is, he doesn't have a lot of quotes. You look at him up and you're mostly going to find quotes from his movies, which means those were written by writers and he made them famous. But you don't hear him talking about himself. Now, of course, he died fairly early. I think 50 maybe. I don't remember exactly. But these are very Capricorn things that I found that he said. He said, I can't say I ever loved my mother. I admired her. And I thought, once again, see, that's Capricorn. Just not exactly going to say mother issues, but can't say I loved her, but I admired her. Admired is even a very Capricorn word. And then he also said, the only point in making money is you can tell some big shot where to go. So when I read that, I just laughed. Because once again, to me, that's that idea. I know what I can use money for. I can tell somebody where to get off, right? This is about power and status. And using money for a purpose, not just to buy comfortable things and to enjoy yourself and go out to dinner. Okay, another Sun and Venus in Capricorn is Betty White. And here again, so Capricorn, she said, retirement is not in my vocabulary. That's a Capricorn. She also said, I'm having the time of my life, and the fact that I'm still working, how lucky can you get? I'm 90 years old and still able to work as much as I do. That's a privilege. Now think about it. Can you imagine anybody but a Capricorn saying that? It's a privilege to work at 90 years old. She also said in an interview in 2010, I've always liked older men. They're just more attractive to me. Of course, at my age, there aren't that many left. But that just brings up that issue. We didn't talk about sensuality a lot. And like I said, but trust me, it's there. Caps, very sexual, very sensual. However, it's also idea being attracted to older men, being attracted to older people, somehow appreciating maturity. That's what you find in Capricorn. Another one is Tiger Woods. He has Sun and Mercury in Capricorn. And he said, people don't understand that when I grew up, I was never the most talented. I was never the biggest. I was never the fastest. I certainly was never the strongest. The only thing I had was my work ethic. And that's been what has gotten me this far. He also said, other golfers may outplay me from time to time, but they will never outwork me. And he said, the only reason I enter an event is to win. It's not to make the cut or finish the top 10 or even second. It's to win the event. And I thought, there again, Cap, you just hear it. Now, I think we've got a few more minutes. I'm going to give you one or two from people who have rising signs in Capricorn. And this occurred to me because, so often when we think about people, I always say, if somebody says, guess my sign, I'm more likely to guess their rising sign than their sun sign, especially if I don't know them very well. Because what are we putting out in the world? We're putting on a face that very much is part of our personality, but we put on the face of our rising sign. So a couple people that have rising sign Capricorn, Paul Newman, for one, and his wife Joanne Woodward also had a rising sign in Capricorn. But Paul Newman had rising, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter all in Capricorn. He was a sun sign Aquarius, but he had all those planets in Capricorn. And he said, dreams without movement are delusions, escapes, kids play. You have to put your feet in your dreams if they're ever going to be reality. The dreamers we know and love today are the ones who worked the hardest. Then another person I pulled out is Leslie Nielsen, the actor. He's a Capricorn rising. He also has Mars and South Node in Capricorn. Now, what I find interesting about him and why he appealed to me is because he started acting in 1955, but he never did a comedy until he did Airplane in 1980. And one of the things I had read about him some time ago is that he actually, after the fact, was upset or frustrated that he had done the Airplane movie because he thought maybe it had really ruined his reputation. There again, Capricorn. But what happened? That's what he became famous for. He went on to make all those Naked Gun movies, remember? And that's how he got immensely popular, was through those movies. And then he also made a few comments that I think are interesting, because he said, it's been dawning on me slowly that for the past 35 years, I've been cast against type, and finally getting to do what I really wanted to do, meaning those comedies. I finally found my home. So I think that's interesting, because here he is, he's putting that out in the world, but he finds that he's somebody else inside. And here again, I wish I remembered what his sun sign was, but just knowing that it was different. And then one other person, I won't quote her, but Lucille Ball, rising in Capricorn, and Moon in Uranus as well. And one thing she did say is luck. I don't know anything about luck. She just worked for everything that she had. So I know we need to wrap up, so let's just, do this quickly. I will see you in a couple of weeks. I will be back. But closing thought for this week, true optimism creates victory. So, with all this Capricorn thing, we have got to lean in to the positive. We've got to lean into our own power, our own authority, and just do what we need to do. So I hope you have happy holidays. Like I said, I will be back. I will be available on 12listen.com. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, to all the listeners and to you in the chat room, and to Serena for being our producer today and this year. Please stay tuned for Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. She's coming up next. You can find her on 12radio.com and on her YouTube channel, Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. So here's your quote of the week. Now this one comes from Martin Luther King Jr., who is sun sign Capricorn. I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. That's Capricorn, hanging in there. This is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on 12listen.com. Please feel free to request something that's good for you. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology with CA Brooks on 12radio.com and streaming on YouTube, where we are changing the way we think about Capricorn.